Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for attending our panel. Really looking forward to today's conversation. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I will be your moderator. Today's panel topic is Endowment Excitement, Fundraising and Management. As usual, before I introduce our panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have to go through a few quick logistics. First of all, I'd like to talk about NXUnite. NXUnite is an online community resource for the mission-driven industry. The NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting connections and relationships and serve as a hub of connection in the mission-driven sector. As you saw in our video, on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cause-driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks here with me today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our amazing audience. At any time during the panel, please feel free to submit your questions via the questions tab or just drop them right in the chat. And if at any point you're also having any technical difficulties, my team member Malou is under the username Team NXUnite, and she will be in the chat happy to do her best to assist. I also did quickly want to say that this session is being recorded. You will have access to it after the panel. It will be right in your email inbox. It'll send it to you, as well as people can continue to register and watch it after. So any of the insight you want to have a second listen to, you will have the chance. All right, I do want to thank everyone who is attending both live and also the recording. Really excited to be in touch with you. It was fun reading through the registration list and seeing all the different organizations represented and all the amazing work you're doing. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. All right, it's time to introduce our panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce Tony Martinetti, who is the evangelist for planned giving. He's been starting and growing planned giving programs since 1997. A former attorney, he launched Planned Giving Accelerator, a membership community to create 1,000+ new planned giving programs in the US, which can also be found at plannedgivingaccelerator.com. He's also the aptly named host of Tony Martinetti Nonprofit Radio, the #1 podcast for nonprofits with 13,000 weekly listeners in small and mid-sized organizations. It's big nonprofit ideas for other 95%. It's at tonymartinetti.com. Great to have you, Tony. All right, we also have Karen Houghton. Karen is the CEO and founder of Infinite Giving, an automated investment platform bringing a better investing experience to nonprofits. She advocates for organizational sustainability through better financial management by hedging against inflation, lowering endowment fees, and growing their asset giving. Nonprofits can do more good work and help us all have stronger, healthier communities. Great to have you, Karen.
Glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Kathleen Ritterizer is an authority on the endowment investment model as the co-author of the books Foundation and Endowment Investing and Top Hedge Fund Investor Stories, Strategies, and Advice, the former executive director of Common Fund Institute and the founder and CEO of Uncorrelated LLC. Uncorrelated LLC provides advisory services to endowment, foundation, and public pension chief investment officers, trustees, and investment committees. Great to have you, Kathleen.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation.
Absolutely. And we have John Griffith. John is a director at Hurdle Callahan. He has over 35 years of experience managing and consulting nonprofits. Before joining Hurdle Callahan in 2014, he was the chief financial officer and treasurer of Bryn Mawr College. John is a leading expert on integrating endowment management and the financial operations of nonprofits. Great to have you, John.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
All right, now it's finally time to hear from our panelists. So Karen, I'm going to turn to you first on this question, and that is what is one thing you would want to tell someone who is new to the world of endowments?
someone who is new to the world of endowments, I would say welcome. We're glad you're here. It is not your mom's endowments anymore. I think a lot of people who are new to the endowment world think I have to have $1 billion fund. I have to have hundreds of millions. It's only for higher education or these really, really large organizations. And at Infinite Giving, we tend to be the voice for the small to mid-sized nonprofits and organizations. So I always like to say, in my mind, I'm so happy for Harvard that they have a $53 billion endowment. But what if we could funnel some of that money to these smaller to mid-sized nonprofits who are directly in our communities, who could also benefit from the sustainability and kind of the legacy giving avenue for different partners? And I think it opens up a lot of really interesting conversations to know that it doesn't have to be a huge endowment to be meaningful. And it doesn't have to be a restricted endowment. There's quasi endowments, micro endowments, unrestricted endowments. And especially a quasi endowment is giving an organization a lot of flexibility to enter into these kind of sustainable giving paths without necessarily knowing exactly what is in their future 30 years, 40 years down the road. Because, and are we getting into that later? I'm like, I could keep going really deep even to just this little bit. Are you going to ask us about that later, or should I?
You know what? Feel free to touch on it now and then bring it up later also.
So the biggest thing to know, right, really high level, right, is that a quasi endowment essentially is still a protected sum that you're saying, hey, here's $1 million. We're going to put it, we're investing it, we're pulling our annual disbursement off. The beauty is it grows, right? You have compound interest, it's getting bigger, it has legacy giving. But if at some point down the road, you and your board change your mind, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 5 years down the road, and you say, you know what, our organizational needs have changed, we're now communicating this, we can actually access those funds and use them for a different purpose. So it gives you flexibility so that you're not locked into that capital forever, which is what a more true endowment would do. So it gives a lot of flexibility to smaller organizations.
Fantastic. Thank you for starting us off with that, Karen. All right, turning to you, Tony, what is something you would want someone new to the fundraising and managing of an endowment to know?
That planned giving is an ideal way to raise money for your endowment. And thank you for hosting me, hosting us. I was muted when I said thank you, so nobody even heard my thank you. But it's a pleasure to be with the panel, and thanks to everybody who's joining us. Planned giving is just ideal for endowment either creation, if you have zero in your endowment, which is fine, you have to start somewhere, or if you have a pretty robust endowment. And the reason is lots of planned gifts, the vast majority of planned gifts come unrestricted. And I'm always encouraging folks to put as much of that unrestricted money as possible into endowment. And we could talk, I know we'll be talking more. So that's an overview. Planned giving, ideal for endowment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, John, I'm going to have you jump in next. What would you want to share with someone new to this world?
First, I should try to figure out how to turn on my camera and my mic at the same time. But assuming I get this worked out. So I think I totally agree with everything that Karen and Tony have said. Most people assume endowments are very large, and Karen even mentioned higher education having great large endowments. 25% of all private schools have less than $10 million endowments. And so we're so pretty focused on the Harvard and et cetera. And the reality is small endowments make a big impact. And Tony's absolutely right on how you should do it through planned giving. But I want to just talk to people about the importance of understanding what an endowment does for an organization. It gives your organization the ability to be excellent, to give your leaders financial flexibility to fulfill your mission. Don't think of an endowment as it's a pot of money that pays out 5% a year. It's got to be a vision. It's got to be a visionary. Don't think about it as just a revenue source. Think about it to excite your donors and other people. Think about it about what excellence it can do to your organization.
Fantastic. Thank you. And finally, Kathleen, what is some insight you'd like to share with someone new to the endowment world?
I think if this had been a conversation had been 2.5 years ago, the one thing I would want anyone to know would be, don't try this at home, But since we have all been at home for the last 2.5 years, what I'm going to say instead is that there's no DIY, there's no do-it-yourself in fiduciary. So, so even no matter what size you are, and I agree with all the comments about what Tony's saying about planned giving is an ideal way to create an endowment. It's a great way to have excellence in your institution and to drive excellence. And it's important no matter what size you are. But no matter what size you are, it's still a complex undertaking that requires a sophisticated approach, sophisticated knowledge, and professional advice and management.
Great. Well, I'm very glad that I have so many experts here with me today as it's so complex. So really looking forward to this conversation. Kathleen, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. So I want to talk about some kind of best practices that we should all be considering when we're talking endowments. So what strategies can people involved with fundraising or managing an endowment follow to kind of not ensure success, because we can never guarantee, but to really set us on the path for success?
Sure. I have a framework that I've created from the work that I've done over the years. And you mentioned all my different experiences earlier, that I call, it adjusts over time, but I'll call it for today's purposes, 5 Ps that for people to keep in mind. The first is the purpose. What's your mission? What's going to be the purpose of this endowment? And that will help you think about what your objectives are. The second P is people. And that means the people in your organization and your governance structure, and really thinking about the kind of governance you need and the kind of advice you need, both internally as well as the people that you're getting to advise you externally. The third is 2 P words, policies and processes. It's really important that you think about having appropriate policies and documenting those policies and making them having those policies in place to help you at times when you need to make effective decisions, that a lot of your hard decisions are made up front through your policy. The fourth is portfolio, is having the right advisors and approach to managing your portfolio so that you can maximize your returns over time. And then the fifth one is performance, which is not just making sure you got excellent investment performance, but making sure that you're overseeing your advisors and your teammates in a way where you're monitoring correctly and making sure that everyone is performing their roles. And I think if you follow that framework, a lot of the things we talk about and the ways you can have an effective endowment and fundraising approach really can come out of those 5 Ps.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, John, I'm going to have you jump in here. What are some best practices everyone involved with fundraising or managing an endowment should know?
So the first thing I would say is that the biggest mistake I see people making with endowments is saying, oh, I have a small endowment, so I should manage it conservatively. So I would say, don't think about the size of your endowment. Think about your financial ability to take risk and understand risk. And I think the biggest mistake people make are the kind of the psychological behavioral finance mistakes, whether it's a herd mentality, which is everyone's doing it, so I'm going to do it, whether it's recency bias, the market's gone down, so of course it's going to go down forever. And so there's a lot of behavioral finance in here, and it's really important that you get an asset allocation that's right for you and you move forward. And what's right for you is dependent on your facts and circumstances, how strong you are financially, what's your operating model, how much you're spending from your endowment. Don't fall into this belief that I only have $5 million, so I have to invest conservatively. And so I say that's the biggest mistake I see with small endowments is they've had $5 million and they've invested so conservatively that it doesn't grow. And the whole reason to have endowments and invest in the market is to grow it. So set it up right, making sure you're going to grow your endowment appropriately.
Great, great. I think it can be easy to put your personal feelings towards money on top of it, but this is a different ballgame. This is a different world. So thank you so much. All right, Tony, going to have you jump in next. What advice would you give to someone involved with fundraising or managing an endowment when they're looking for best practices?
I just want to say, Kathleen, I'm glad you didn't just have 2 Ps because we don't want to be talking about PP. So I'm glad you had 5 Ps, not just 2. Maybe I'm a little contrary in representing, the planned giving fundraising part, because planned giving is not complicated. And my advice is, if you're launching planned giving, you get started with the most basic, most popular by far planned gift, which is a gift in people's wills. And that is not complicated. You can, today's Thursday, give yourself tomorrow. You could start launching planned giving next Monday, just encouraging people to include your nonprofit, your mission in their wills. Because wills are a very simple topic. Look, everybody knows what a will is. Everybody knows they need a will. And everybody knows how wills work. So you don't have to educate your staff or yourself about charitable remainder unit trust with net makeup provisions and charitable gift annuities. And you don't have to educate your donors about more complicated, more sophisticated planned gifts. I mean, those are out there, and those are valuable too. But the way to launch your planned giving, it's simple. You start with gifts by will, because everybody knows what you're talking about. And you start by talking to the folks who love your work, and we know they love your work because they've been long-term donors to you. So when you're talking to those long-term committed donors about the simplest, by far the most popular planned gift, the gift in wills, you've launched your planned giving program. So give yourself tomorrow. You could start on Monday.
Fantastic. Ready to just jump right in. Thank you, Tony. All right. Karen, anything you'd like to add on what should be considered when someone involved with managing an endowment is looking for those best practices to kind of latch onto?
Yeah, I love what everyone has said. And John, my investment advisor heart was quite happy with your commentary on growth. Of course, it's always about suitability, but we're always like, endowments should be growth accounts. It is a long-term horizon. And people just make too many emotional decisions about finances. So I always like, let's look at the data. Let's look at what we're doing. When we're talking to Infinite Giving, often when we're talking to organizations who are starting to perhaps create their first endowment, we usually ask, are you setting 10-year goals? Are you looking at horizons that are beyond the next 5 years? Are you in the decades? Where do you want to be in 20 years, 10 years? And you don't have to have all the answers, right? Like, there's a lot of things that can happen. But if you're starting to kind of vision that future, and the other kind of financial cornerstone that we always ask about, and we say, have you met a healthy reserve fund? You don't want to be fundraising for an endowment if you're still in the scarcity mindset and you haven't reached healthy reserve funds. So pre-COVID, healthy reserves were like 3 to 6 months. Post-COVID, everyone's like, oh, now we actually know and understand why we were supposed to have reserve funds. And it's they've kind of lived through that. So post-COVID, 6 to 12 months, operational reserves, right? And then you're sitting there, and the first question once they have those reserves is, I'm like, great, where are they sitting? Because those are ideally also longer term investments. And sometimes I talk to people who are like, we want an endowment, and I'm like, that's great. But are your reserve funds sitting in a savings account? Because that's often the first step, right? When you're looking at inflation that is 8 or 9%, and your savings account is giving you a 0.06% average annual return, and your big risk is maybe a money market, right there, we're starting to have conversations about, let's understand even investments in general. And if you're going to hedge against inflation, the first step is getting that out of a savings account or a money market. And then you do want to go more conservative in your investments, right, with a reserve fund. But then you can also open up an endowment, right? Create a quasi endowment. You can do a donor-led endowment. I love, Kathleen, your 5 Ps. I understand those. They make total sense. Tony, I also kind of I'm like, yeah, let's simplify a little bit. So one of the things Infinite Giving is doing is Kathleen's strategic kind of points are all so helpful and valid. The kind of semantics of actually opening an endowment should be really straightforward. So we can have an endowment. I'm talking to somebody right now. We're going to set up their endowment. We're going to have it ready in a few days, right? So it takes 20 minutes of their time up front. We help them through investment policy statement and kind of getting those guardrails for what they want. And then once that account is open, you're calling it an endowment. You handle the disbursement, you do the allocation. We help with all that. But it's not it shouldn't take months and months of time, right? If you're coming to me ready, we can look at your investments policy statement, 20 minutes of your time. We can create your brokerage account and your endowment within 3 to 5 business days. So just know that there's a lot of thoughtful kind of consideration and visioning that needs to take place. But once you're ready and you're in that, and then to Tony's point, once you have an endowment, like some people will do named endowments, we help people do named endowments, and then you can have a quasi endowment. You now have a brokerage account. So for Tony, like in that planned giving and in those wills, here's the brokerage account. Here's the D2C information that you put in your will that, once you pass, here's where that money goes, versus like, hey, we just want to leave it and here's the wish. Like you can actually do all the groundwork up front. So then that way, when you do pass for planned giving, that plan is even more simple.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. All right, Tony, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. How can nonprofit professionals utilize fundraising when it comes to growing or managing an endowment? What do they really need to be considering when they're trying to build that endowment?
Yeah, it's launching planned giving fundraising. As Karen was suggesting, some of these gifts could be restricted, but the vast majority of gifts in wills are unrestricted. And as I said earlier, I'm always encouraging folks to put as much as possible of that unrestricted money that comes in into some form of endowment. And I know that there's a tension. I realize leases have to be paid, salaries, copier bills have to be paid. There's operational expenses, but as much as possible, carve out for the endowment growth. So again, it's planned giving, it's launching planned giving with simple gifts by will, and then you can go beyond that. If you want to start encouraging folks to maybe make a qualified charitable distribution, which a lot of people know as the IRA rollover, for those who are 70 and a half and over, because that's a lot of your committed donors may be that age. So you can encourage those IRA gifts. There are simple life insurance gifts that are good for people at any age. You might venture into charitable gift annuities, but again, the place to start your planned giving, if you're not doing it, the place to launch on Monday, simple gifts by will. And then later on, you might decide or might not to embark on the more sophisticated or, slightly more challenging gifts. I don't want to make planned giving sound off-putting, but by far, wills are the vastly easiest gift to launch with. And that's the place to start.
Fantastic. Always know where to start, and then we can figure out the rest later. I love it. Awesome. Okay, Kathleen, how can individuals prepare themselves for managing an endowment?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't start with talking about books, and I would definitely recommend reading books like, of course, the OG David Swenson's book, Pioneering Portfolio Management. My book, which is called Foundation and Endowment Investing, is Profiles of Leading Chief Investment Officers, but it has some background on how to approach managing an endowment. So, and that's how I've learned. Writing that book is what led me to learn about endowments and to understand how they work. So there's definitely reading the media, P&I, Chief Investment Officer magazine, online publications. But another really, really important way to learn and to get prepared is to be involved in programs like this, and to join networking groups like NXUnite and your various trade associations like the Council on Foundations, local philanthropy groups. That's another way to do it. And another way is related to that is to find advisors who have expertise like my fellow panelists who can help you with various nuances of setting up and fundraising and managing an endowment.
Colleen, could I jump in and address a question that I see or a comment from Robert? Thank you very much, Robert. He's saying that you could, in addition to a gift by will, you could have a gift agreement. Absolutely, you certainly could. A lot of folks will just specify their wishes in the will, in the little bequest paragraph. So it could be done either way. If you're donor does want to designate their gift by will to something specific. But I just want to reinforce that most gifts by will are unrestricted. People are just happy to support your mission long term. But Robert, you're right. You certainly, there could be a gift agreement with the organization if a donor wants to do that. Thanks, Colleen.
Of course, glad to have that answered. All right, Karen, I want to have you jump in. I feel like there's always more to talk about in terms of endowment management, whether it's from the beginning or kind of further along the lines. So anything you want to add to what Tony and Kathleen have said, or kind of just in general about what else we need to know about managing an endowment?
Sure. Well, when you're preparing for your first one, I think fundraising is storytelling, right? Like the best fundraisers are engaging, personalized storytellers. And instead of being scared of endowments, because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know, that seems big and it's scary. It should be a very beautiful, easy story to tell. Because what Higher Ed has shown us is that high wealth donors want to give endowments, right? It is legacy giving. It is a gift that they give one time that can literally live for generations to come. So it's like I could give a gift, and then I know that even after I've passed, that gift is helping the organization that I love and that I've supported all my life, through my daughter's life. Like there is a beauty to legacy giving and a story to tell. And I think sometimes people that we talk to are like, well, yeah, but I think somebody here mentioned it. They're like, but I can't keep the lights on. Like I still have this scarcity mindset of like, but if someone gives here, they won't give there. And I will tell you that all the data shows that that is not actually accurate. On average, when you're giving and talking to high wealth donors, the more strategic opportunities, no, I did not say the number of asks and the way you ask them, but the number of strategic kind of paths and opportunities for them to give often equate to a 20% increase in giving. So it may be a little less here, but on average, it's around a 20% increase in giving each year. So know that it is an opportunity that most high wealth donors want to give. It's also a point for education, right? So occasionally I've had, but this donor only wants to give a restricted endowment. And I'm like, great. Have you talked to them about what that means? Have you talked to them about what could happen in the future and all of these different kind of scenarios? So often just sitting down and telling them this legacy story, inviting them to be a part of planned giving or even start like an endowment. We have people who would give micro endowments. Maybe it's a $25,000 gift, which when you're talking a 5% disbursement, it's really little, right? But it's like, you know what? You could do a named endowment. What if that family, though, is able to add $25,000 every year for the next 10 or 20 years? It starts to become really meaningful and move the needle. And so sometimes, yes, it's about your mission and your organization, but it's also about kind of building that bridge between what your donor wants and how they want to help and the legacy that they want to leave, and giving them the opportunity instead of just saying, we don't have an endowment, we don't do an endowment. Educating yourself and knowing the paths and kind of setting that table is really helpful. And I think it brings most organizations who are out of that scarcity mindset and starting to think long-term, really great opportunities. We talked to a lot of folks like John mentioned, where it's like $10 million endowment is their dream, right? Ideally, you're kicking off $500,000 a year, your 5% disbursement, and that's achievable for most schools, organizations. That should be very, very achievable.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. All right, John, I want you to have time to jump in here. What do we want to add to managing a nonprofit's endowment? Goodness, my words were not coming out there. Turning it over to you, John.
So I think we're focusing on gifts, and it's important to know that you can grow your endowment. As Karen mentioned, it could be your reserves are too large. It could be operating surpluses. It could be any time you go over your annual fund budget. It could be especially even if they're not requests, they could be large unexpected gifts. So it's really organizations prioritizing the endowment and growing the endowment and putting the money in there. And when I was a CFO, it was 100% of bequests go in there. Any large unexpected gifts go in there. As soon as we hit our annual fund target, every penny goes in there. 50% of operating budget surpluses automatically go in the endowment. So it's not, people believe that these organizations, like when I was at Bryn Mawr College, half of our gifts were true endowment gifts. The other half was just money we put aside, whether they were excess gifts, operating, they were just other sources of funds we put away for the long haul. So don't overly focus on gifts. If you're an organization, want to prioritize an endowment, set up policies that will encourage that, to do that. And there are lots of ways you can do that. But basically, when you're prioritizing what do we do with our money, make sure having it, growing your endowment is part of that discussion. And people focus, there's too much during good times, recognize that these are the good old days and put money aside. And because when they're in the good old days, people are still spending and go, and it's like, no, there's a fluid, cycle here. And during the good times, put money in. And so during the bad times, you can take money out. And so I also recommend people adjust their spending rates. If things are going very well, don't necessarily take money out of your endowment. Keep it reinvested. And then when you need the money, take extra money out of the endowment. So people aren't thinking about it as a way to grow it and just be aggressive on growing it. But if you really need the money, spend it. But when you don't need it, don't spend it.
John, I love that idea of putting budget surpluses into endowment.
And like just the common sense of short-term sacrifice for long-term gains. I wish that was more of a standard go-to practice in nonprofits, and I don't think that happens as often as it should.
And I think the way you do that is you split the difference. You say 50% of this goes in, 50% the president or executive director can spend on whatever they're currently working on. So I think it's a mixture. It's kind of compromising on that, but make sure the long-term interest of the endowment is always at the table, is part of the discussion.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. I have one more question that I want to ask all our panelists, but I also want to make sure that those of us watching in the audience get a chance to ask their questions. So this would be a great time to continue to submit your questions in the chat as well as the question function, up to you which you prefer. But first, I'm going to sneak in my final question, which is a topic that I try to bring up in almost every panel session because it's something I hear a lot. Nonprofit professionals are busy. They're overwhelmed sometimes, not all of them, but they can get overwhelmed and it can be hard to think in advance, think of that future, take on a big project, take on a goal of starting an endowment when you're feeling that way. So I'm hoping that we could talk about like how an individual handling an endowment can prepare themselves to not be overwhelmed. What can they know is in their corner and what resources are there out there? So John, I'm gonna have you start us off on this one.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, there's so much free advice out there. I'm surprised with how many people have questions about endowment. Just don't call. They could call me. I'd spend an hour on the phone with them. I know Karen, Tony, and Kathleen would as well. And so when I was a CFO and I had to learn something, I would just say, I'm going to talk to 5 people who know something about this. And there's so many experts out there, and people spend their time just kind of wondering about an endowment, or geez, Tony, I don't know anything about planned giving. Do you know anyone who knows something about planned giving? And there's just so much free advice out there where even though we're in the business of selling our product or what we're doing, we're in the business of helping nonprofits. And so not enough people reach out and say, hey, can you just walk me through what would you do to start a small endowment? How would you look at that? And there's a lot of free advice out there. And I think people don't spend enough time just talking to potential vendors and getting to know them and seeing what, getting the ideas that we're more than willing to give to people to help them out.
Absolutely. If this panel series has taught me one thing, it's that there's so many experts out there and they're so ready to talk, and it's been really wonderful to get a chance to hear from everyone. So great advice. Thank you. Okay, Karen, what can nonprofit professionals do to not get overwhelmed by the concept of handling an endowment?
I think you just have to remember that there are people who are ready to help, kind of like what we've already talked about, but you're not an executive director or a CFO where it's great, your job, just go open an endowment. And I think Kathleen touched on that at the beginning. It's like you want a fiduciary, you need an investment advisor, a consultant. There are people who will come alongside you who do this and who are experts. So, I mean, you could go to our website, infinitegiving.com, and you can do like a free 20-minute investment consultation with us. We make it really easy. And that's just like, sometimes I do those and I'm like, we're talking about reserves, we're talking about endowments, we're talking about crypto or stock. Like, we are all available in that. And so endowments, are they complex? Yes. Is investing hard? Yes. But the people in your lives around you help you make it easy, right? So when we are partnering with somebody, it's like, hey, this is complex, but we're going to handle all of this. here are the questions that I need you and your team to work through and kind of know. And we were talking about suitability and long-term goals and what you want it to be named and how you want it to be set up. But like, those are all things we advise on. So you're not in it by yourself. There's so many people out there that, again, to John's point, like you can just call us and we're here to help.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, on to you, Tony. Can you give any advice towards keeping nonprofit professionals stress-free when they're handling an endowment?
No, your life is a misery. It's bound to be. It has been, it is, and it always will be miserable. No, of course. So, yeah, when you're launching planned giving, as I said, you get started Monday. You just take it incrementally, one step at a time. What really upsets me about the misunderstandings around planned giving, one of them is that it's technical and that it's going to take a lot of time and money, and we need a lawyer on staff. None of that is true, or on our board. None of that is true, and this is fundamental to what I teach in the Planned Giving Accelerator. So if you're taking it incrementally, as I said, you want to be talking first to your most loyal, committed donors. So if I say that, and I say, the best place to launch planned giving is with folks who are roughly 55 to 60 and over, and there are reasons for that, but that's really the sweet spot. You can go beyond those ages, you can go younger maybe later, but to start, we're talking about launching 55 to 60 and over and loyal, committed donors. So when I say that, do a couple of people come to mind? Maybe if it's 2 or 3, perhaps, like, oh yeah, she has been with us for a long time, board member or not. We don't care about the size of the gifts. Nowhere in there did I say major donors over the long term. If someone's been loyal and committed to you and they've been giving you $10 a year for lots of years, or maybe multiple times even over a span of years, they are a terrific planned giving prospect. And so when I add in 55 to 60, if some folks start to come to mind, even if it is just 2 or 3, like those are your best top prospects. And then you could go mine your database for other folks that don't occur to you off the top of your head, but they're still loyal and committed. And if you don't have age in your CRM database, use giving as a proxy. If you've got people who have been giving to you 20, 25 years, and that's not uncommon when you look back, then odds are those folks are 55 to 60 roughly and over. So use giving as a proxy if you don't have age, which I know a lot of folks don't. And just starting on Monday, I'm not even going to give you till Tuesday. You start on Monday, pick up the phone and talk to one of those 2 or 3 people who came to mind and say, look, we're starting to encourage gifts by will. And that's not the opening to your conversation, naturally, but these are people that you know well. You've got a relationship with them. They're long-term committed donors. We're starting to focus on gifts, long-term gifts by will. Is that something that would interest you? Could we talk about it? Right? All right. So that conversation may not take place on Monday, but you can start to open the door to that conversation with those top prospects.
Oh man, if I worked for a nonprofit, I would block off my Monday. I'd be like, I know what I'm doing. But unfortunately,
incremental, yes, just get started incrementally. It's not a big website blowout, major campaign launch. You could just start with a phone call to a long-term committed donor.
Fantastic. Great. All right, Kathleen, want to give you time to jump in here. What would you want to tell someone who's worried about being overwhelmed by endowments?
Sure. I would say, I think everyone has kind of touched on what I would have said, and I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, which is that if you're an individual that's overwhelmed, remember, there is no do-it-yourself in fiduciary. So maybe on Monday morning when you're getting started, you're in your office, you've had your coffee. That's when you take 5 minutes to be overwhelmed, and then say. Then ask yourself, what am I going to do? Who am I going to call? And that's going to take the 20 minutes that Karen was talking about. So it's really just coming back to that. If you are feeling overwhelmed, just to remember that there are so many There are, one of the reasons you might be overwhelmed is that there's a lot of options and there's a lot of ways to approach these problems. But it's sort of, that's the hard part, as Karen had touched on, the complex part. There's a lot going on. The easy part is that there are a lot of smart, talented people that are available to help you and advise you about how to set a program for plan giving up, or how to set up an endowment, or how to manage an endowment, and how to oversee the endowment once it's in place. So just remember, there's no do-it-yourself. Sit with your overwhelm for 5 minutes or so, and then get started, because there's people here to help you, and there's experts and professionals that can help you get the job done very effectively and in not as much time as you think.
Wonderful. Always like when things take less time than I expect them to. All right.
Can I ask a question, Colleen?
Yes, please do,
I'm gonna
Karen.
change it up. We have a little bit of time, right?
Yep.
I want to know what you guys think about named endowments. Like, so the size gift, or kind of what, I mean, we have thoughts too, but we get asked more and more about that, on the idea of where do you set that threshold? What is the benefit of a named endowment versus like an organizational endowment? Do y'all have opinions on this?
Yes, I do. I think if you're starting out, I don't think there's any reason you should put an overly high number on the named endowment piece. I think that we should recognize our donors for being generous, and some can be more generous than others. So I think sometimes, maybe when you get more advanced, if you're a university, how much are we selling the rights to the hockey arena for? Those kind of things can be hard decisions. But I think as a small organization, just thanking the donors you have through naming opportunities, I don't see any reason to be overly focused on how large that has to be. I think that that's a kind of a luxury that large organizations have, and a small organization, I'm not sure that would be that important to me. But Tony's a fundraising expert, so he must know the answer to this.
Oh my God! Now I'm on the spot. No, I agree, John. It's based on the donors' wishes. A lot of the folks that I see nonprofits working with, don't even want to be named. They just want to make a gift. They don't want to name a gift in memory of parents, which is common, or a deceased partner or spouse, which is, I see that sometimes too. But a lot of folks just aren't interested in the naming. But again, I agree with you. You don't have to focus on large numbers. We're just I think for most folks, we're just trying to get started with launching an endowment or growing it from something small. So you don't want to get too hung up on having policies, because then policies and giving thresholds, then that gets wrapped up in the board, and the board only meets every 2 months, and the agenda for the next 6 months is filled, and then for the 8th month they're taking off, and the next thing you know, it's a year and you still haven't launched planned giving. I'd like to see you launch it on Monday. So try not to get too hung up on policies. I'm agreeing with John. Basically keep it simple and keep it simple.
And I would add, Karen, that I think that one thing, I think there's a couple of ways to think of that. One is, depending on the kind of organization you are and what you're trying to accomplish, what is your purpose? What is your mission? And what size are you now? Like, if a naming gift is the difference between having money and going out of business and not being able to achieve your mission, then you want to take it. But I would also agree that you don't want that to be your day one. Let's just go get a naming gift. The other side of it is, I do think that more and more, and this is something that I think all nonprofit professionals have to watch, is that naming gifts, I think, can sort of warp the institution and the mission, and you like, I got an announcement from an educational institution I'm involved with that an alum gave a lot of money for some random thing, so is the naming gift going to come with the trade-off of warping the mission in some extent, or distracting you from the mission? So those are things that I would also think about keeping in mind.
I love all these. I'm like-minded as well. Sometimes people get caught up in restricting named endowments. So sometimes I'm like, usually what we say is I'm like, hey, you should have an if this is where you want to grow and this meets all of your long-term needs, you should set up an organization led endowment, usually a quasi endowment. And then you should also allow for named endowments, because as John and Tony kind of said too, like it is what speaks to that donor, how they want to give. If that's important to them, I've literally had people, no, I don't want to do that because there's a little bit more admin and we just want them to give to the main endowment and it feels complicated. So just know that named endowments do not have to be complicated. And ultimately, it's still one pot of money that's helping your organization. And so like our minimum for that is $25,000, but like we have a tool that allows a donor to gift an endowment to an organization in 10 minutes for free. And so when we talk about simplifying, now often we will get on, and if they're larger gifts, there's a lot more specialization that goes into that. But there are ways to do it and have it be really meaningful. But what I always ask people is it goes back to the donor. Like, how can you help them help you?
Great. Well,
Yeah,
Karen,
one of the interesting things are places that are successful fundraising often don't think they have a culture of giving to endowments. I hear this a lot from organizations that are very successful annual funds and very successful capital campaigns, and they think there's some magic jumping over to endowments. And I just think that it's education, it's talking to people, and these donors give you money because they love your organization. And so a conversation with them about what endowment means and what that would do for you. Too many places, I think, just kind of give up and say, oh, a culture doesn't work for endowments. And I just think that's a conversation and a discussion needs to happen. There's no cultural reason why a certain organization can't have an endowment. It's just, the effort of having those discussions with donors.
Yeah. And I was talking to an organization the other day and they had excess reserves. So I'm like, great. Do you have projects that you need? Is there something on the sidelines, raises? Like there's a lot of different ways. If you don't have a place to spend it, this is a perfect opportunity to seed an endowment, quasi endowment. So it's not locked up forever. You have some flexibility. And they were like, well, our consultant says we shouldn't do endowments. And I was like, okay, well, like, why? And we started talking through that. And they were like, oh, they're just not believers in endowments. And when you dug underneath it, there was, again, just like kind of this perception of endowments are for this group of nonprofits. And so I was challenging it a little bit and just being like, hey, why is there that perceived notion? It may not be a fit for you, and that's okay. But like talking through that. So if you ever run into that with somebody, I would just make sure you dig underneath to figure out the why. Is your organization not sustainable? Do you not want to exist in 10 to 20 years? Or do you believe that it will detract from your donors? And is that a reality? Maybe you think you don't have high wealth donors. Tony mentioned, I think it was you, Tony, earlier. It's like, hey, if you have somebody who's been regularly giving to you, even in small amounts, then maybe later down the road, they will gift you a big gift. Or, what is a meaningful gift in that? Like there's a lot of different ways to define that. But I think being open to different avenues and ways to give is so important as you're building financial sustainability for your organization.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to jump in here. Karen, thank you so much for that question. You made my moderating
Just
job
let me
very
ask it.
easy right there. I do want to do a quick speed round of some questions that have come in from the audience as well as from registration for this panel. So one question, I think we've brought it up kind of in a few of your all's answers, but it would be great to just have a quick, everyone just respond quickly. Their advice on this is, how do we convince board members that we need and must have endowment funding? It seems like there's some convincing that needs to happen. So Kathleen, would you start us off with this with a quick speed round of it?
Sure. I mean, I think it definitely just boils down to is what is the mission? Do we have, what is our mission? What is our purpose? And if we are here to solve a problem, and many of the problems that nonprofits are solving, unfortunately, they're not solving them. They're supporting problems that may be chronic. So I think if you think that you want to be continuing your work into, as Karen's put it, 10, 20, 100, a million years from now, having an endowment is the way to make sure that the organization can survive and thrive long into the future.
Definitely. All right, Tony, I want to hear your thoughts.
Ask your board this question. What does our community, however you define community, it might be something local, state or regional, province, whatever. What does our community look like if our work stops 15 years from now? We don't exist 15 years from now. What does the community look like? That will help your board reflect on the sustainability of your work, your mission, and your values, as Kathleen was just talking about, sustainability. So what does the community look like without your work? Well, planned gifts and endowments are intended to stave off that ugly future from ever happening.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm actually going to switch the questions for you and John and Karen so we can get one more in, which is how much of the endowment's return should be spent and how much reinvested? Karen, would you start us off? And if you want to sneak in your board answer, you're welcome to, but I wanted to make sure we got this one answered.
Sure. To sneak it in, I would say that board member, often that is an emotional reason and or it is a lack of data. And so some of that would just be like asking why there's such a sound no to that, and then having data kind of to work your way into whatever reasoning and cause that you have. Usually, again, it's a lack of awareness of how the different opportunities to create endowments and how they can be set up. There's a lot more flexibility than people realize. Disbursements. The beauty of a disbursement is you get to choose. Like you could do 2%, you could do 10%. The average is 4 to 5%. So very standard would be a 45% disbursement. Often the investment allocation is a 70-30 or a 60-40. Again, some can be more aggressive. We have somebody who's investing in a 95-5 and they have long-term goals and there's different things. So all that to say is there are variables. There's no right and wrong necessarily. 10% means that you're going to buy down that endowment. And so again, that works more for quasi endowment, shorter term goals. So if your target average annual market returns are around 8%. So however you're investing it, usually you want to pull a little less. If you're getting 8% returns, your disbursement is going to be 5%. That means 3% is getting reinvested into that. With compound interest, it's beautiful. And again, when we're talking about nonprofits and capital preservation, the reason you're reinvesting some of that back along with compound interest is you're hedging against inflation over long term. So that value that you're getting in your disbursement in that percentage is keeping up with inflation. Even in a great economy, you still need growth.
Great. All right, John, how much of the endowment's return should be spent and how much reinvested?
So this is a question for entire webcast, and I've done many on this topic. So I like people to think about spending at a lower amount. So Karen's 4 to 5, I say spend at 4. And the reason I say that is so that when you need the money, you can spend at 5. What I see organizations do is trying to spend at too high of a level. And then when they really need extra money, there's no more there. And so I always encourage people to spend at the lower end, recognizing that during times when you need more money, raise your spending rate a little bit. And then when you don't need so much money, lower it. And I think that to me is the key also to that trustee discussion, which is, it's not just the excellence that endowment can give you, it can give you financial flexibility. To do that, you spend at a lower level during normal times and you raise it when there's a strategic issue or financial concern that you have. And so to me, it's more complicated than what I just said because it relates to asset allocation, how quick you want to grow your endowment, et cetera. But I think for the most part, I think people if they spend less from their endowment, it will grow faster. It will mean more to the organization. And then you have more impact when you need it. There's too many places I work with that are now wishing they hadn't been spending at 5.5% because now they can't spend any higher. I would say that there are state laws that limit how much you can spend from the endowment. So it's state specific. And so sometimes it's a 7% or lower is presumed acceptable. Anything over 7, you have to document why that's fiduciary responsible. And so there are state laws that govern specifically how high you can spend and also how low. There are state laws that limit you spending lower than certain amounts. So make sure you know what your state law is. MIFA is the name of the law.
I love that point, John. And like in the IPS or in the endowment agreement, IPS being investment policy statement, right? And in your endowment agreement, your board can dictate where you want that disbursement levels to fall. So giving yourself the flexibility to say, hey, our max distribution will sit here, our minimum is here. And then that gives the board like, hey, here's our parameters. But every year we can choose, hey, where are we sitting? What's the performance? What are our needs? So remember that you have flexibility in that, and you can even build that flexibility into the agreement.
Fantastic. All right, we have to wrap up this portion. There's more questions. I have more questions, but we are almost at the hour. So if you do have lingering questions, whether you're on the recording or you're watching it live now, we will be sending out a survey to you after this panel where you can let us know your feedback about the panel experience in general, but also give us direct feedback about what conversations you hope we are going to be having in the future. We have a ton of panels planned for the next few months, and we want to make sure we're addressing the topics that are most important to you. So, kind of in that mindset, I want to do one final speed round with our panelists of what conversations are you all hoping we're going to have in the future as a kind of nonprofit, mission driven community? There's so many topics out there, so many things we could be talking about, but what's a conversation you're particularly excited about happening in the next few months? So, John, would you start us off on this one?
I think all nonprofits have to focus on financial sustainability over the long term. And I think that's, if anything we've learned from COVID, it's that we need to focus on that. And to me, the endowment's a critical component of that. And so too many places do planning and they kind of look at operations, or you need to look at it holistically. You need to think about what's it going to look like in the long term. I think most organizations are too short-term focused. That board member who doesn't understand the endowment, hasn't answered Tony's question. They haven't thought about 20 years from now. And it's the long-term nature of nonprofits that make them so special and important to communities. And it's also what makes it important that you think about the endowment when you're also thinking about your long-term financial plan.
Great, thank you. Kathleen?
I'm thinking, well, there's a couple of things. One is how and who are going to help us achieve our goals. And then the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is what can we learn from the work that Mackenzie Scott has been doing and how she's been approaching philanthropy. And I don't have an answer to that, but that's a question that I have been thinking about quite a bit. And I think other nonprofits ought to be, or probably are, thinking about that too.
Great. Karen?
John is my guy over there. Financial sustainability. We talk about that all day long. And then I guess I would also add just how much technology is coming around and being able to make a lot of these processes easier, more convenient, and more accessible for more organizations.
Fantastic. And Tony?
I'm the evangelist for planned giving. So I want to see more planned giving conversations, that it's not a black box. You don't need expertise. It doesn't cost a lot. It's not too technical for you or your donors. So turn all those things around into positives. It's easy. You don't need expertise. It's simple for your donors. It's simple for your nonprofit. I'd like to see more planned giving conversations.
Fantastic. Me too. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our panel. I do want to give a big thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in person, we'd be hearing a round of applause, but just know that I'm sending the emotional round of applause to you. I also want to thank everyone who has attended live and also watching the recording. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you're watching this with us. We really enjoyed it. I hope you learned something and will take something with you. Maybe you have a lot of plans for what you're going to get done on Monday, as we've been discussing about. We have a packed summer and fall of panels left in the next few months. So please keep an eye out on the NXUnite website as well as the NXUnite LinkedIn. We have topics such as social media, creating educational programs, donor appreciation, all sorts of different topics related to the world of nonprofits, and I would love to have you there. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending you that survey. Please, if you have a moment, fill it out. Let us know your experience with the panels and let us know what topics you're hoping we will be discussing in the future. I think that's it from me. Thank you all so much. I know we've hit our time, so have a nice rest of your day, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Colleen.